So I watched Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah, and I'm still low-key reeling from it. Like, I finished the last episode, sat there staring at the black screen, and the only thing running through my brain was, oh, so we're doing emotional reparations for past lives now. Okay, welcome back to Story Frame Recaps. By the way, if you love living through fictional pain, screaming at your screen because a character will not stop making self-destructive choices, and then overanalyzing all of it with someone who takes this way too seriously, you're in the right place. If you're new here, feel free to hit subscribe so you don't miss future breakdowns, but no pressure. Finish this video first, see if we vibe, and then decide. Alright, let's get into it, because this drama is not playing around from the first 5 minutes. Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah basically asks, what if the man who ruined his life by choosing the wrong woman got a second chance and realized the real person he destroyed wasn't even himself, it was someone completely innocent he barely remembered? Our May-led, Su Lin Feng, is this polished heir to a massive family conglomerate, the kind of guy who in any other drama would be introduced flanked by bodyguards in a 3-piece suit with cold elevator door sound effects. But the show actually opens with him at his absolute lowest. Bleeding, alone, phone on the floor, his so-called loving wife looking down at him with that dead calm face villains use when they finally get everything they want. The first scene is honestly brutal in a quiet way. There's no dramatic thunderstorm, no melodramatic screaming, just Lin Feng realizing at the very end that his wife has been using him, playing him, and finally discarding him for his shares and his surname. He tries to crawl to her, asks, Royan, why? And she just answers, because you were easy. That line? It hits. Because it's not about intelligence, it's about emotional vulnerability. You instantly get that his downfall isn't that he's dumb, it's that he trusted the wrong person with a loyalty that should have gone to someone else. And then we see the company press conference on TV, the headlines calling him unstable, the police sirens outside, and the sound sort of muffles as the blood pools. Cut to black. Title card. Then boom, he wakes up. 10 years earlier. Back in his bedroom in his family mansion, fully alive, gasping, sweating, with his heart pounding like he just ran out of hell. And the way the show handles that whole rebirth realization is actually so satisfying. He doesn't just instantly go, oh, I've reincarnated, cool, time to be a business god. No, he's disoriented. He thinks he's hallucinating. He runs downstairs and nearly collides with his father, who in his first life died of a stroke after all the corporate mess, and he literally staggers back because seeing this man alive again knocks the air out of him. There's this tiny, quiet moment where his dad is scolding him for oversleeping, and Lin Feng just grabs his arm with shaking hands and says, "You're still here?" And his dad's like, "What kind of creepy thing are you saying first thing in the morning?" But you can see this flicker of concern in his eyes. That little acting choice sets the tone. This isn't going to be just a revenge power fantasy where our male-led turns into this ice-cold mastermind. He's traumatized. He's grateful. He's terrified he's going to screw it up again. And then, of course, the show does the thing we're all waiting for. It reintroduces the ex-wife candidate. Jiang Royan, in this timeline, is not his wife yet. She's still the girl the Su family is casually considering as a good, solid political match. In the first life, she approached him like some gentle savior. Now, with all his memories intact, he's watching her every move like someone who's seen behind the mask. You know that feeling when you rewatch a drama, and suddenly all the nice gestures from a villain feel creepy because you know where it leads? The show makes you feel that, through him. There's this early dinner scene where the families meet. In the past, this was the start of their tragic marriage. This time, though, the camera stays really close on his eyes while she plays her role, apologizing for being too bold, pretending to be uncomfortable with the idea of engagement, lowering her gaze exactly at the right beats to look obedient but not weak. Lin Feng is just sitting there motionless, watching, and the sound design drops out everything except the clink of her chopsticks. It's so tense. His father is smiling, the elders are pleased. and you can almost see their old future assembling itself again like a trap snapping shut. And then he just says, very calmly, I'm not considering marriage right now. The whole table freezes. His dad looks at him like, excuse me? Royan blinks, clearly not expecting resistance this early in the game. She hides it fast with a soft laugh. But for half a second, you see the calculation in her eyes. That half second is so important. The actress nails that micro shift from, oh dear, I'm shy, to wait, my script is not going according to plan. Now here's the thing about this drama that surprised me. It doesn't immediately toss Lin Feng into supervillainy mode where he crushes everyone who wronged him. Instead, it anchors him to this one very specific memory, a summer day from his childhood, with a little girl he barely knew. The show sprinkles these fragments in early on. Sunlight on dust, a red kite tangled in a tree, him as a young boy crying alone behind some holiday villa, and this girl bringing him melted ice cream and saying, it doesn't matter if it melts. It's still sweet. He never even knew her name clearly. He called her Xio Yue because that's all he remembered from her mother shouting from a distance. Back in the new timeline, as he's scrambling to avoid all his old mistakes, he bumps, literally, into Lin Xive. She's carrying this stack of design portfolios, walking way too fast because she's late for a part-time job interview, and he steps out of a car at the wrong moment. Papers everywhere. He bends down to help, their hands touch, yada yada. But what actually sells it is not the cliché, it's the way sound warps. The crumple of paper, the distant noise of traffic, and then, buried under it, the echo of that kid voice calling, Big brother, don't cry. He freezes. Xive, on the other hand, has no clue who he is. To her, he's just some absurdly well-dressed, unknowingly unmoved CEO blocking the sidewalk. She snaps, if you're not going to help, at least stop stepping on my work. Because yes, our female lead actually has a backbone and a temper, thank God. There's this tiny pause, and then he lets out this awkward little laugh, almost disbelieving, and starts picking things up. You can see it on his face. He's seeing the same eyes from his memory on a grown woman. But he doesn't say anything. How do you even start that conversation? Hi, I think you were the kid who once gave me melted ice cream 20 years ago and have been emotionally haunted by you ever since? Exactly. What I love is that the drama doesn't rush their bond. It would have been very easy to make it like childhood fated love, boom, destiny, soulmates, done. But Xive is busy surviving. She doesn't have time to be anyone's manic pixie healing device. She's juggling freelance illustration gigs, taking care of her grandma, and fending off a very realistic pile of financial anxiety. When he keeps popping up in her life, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally because fate has a dark sense of humor, she is suspicious as hell. As she should be. When a random rich man offers help, your first reaction should not be, wow, Prince Charming. It should be, what's the catch? And the show leans into that. There's this fantastic scene in a coffee shop later where she straight up asks him, do I remind you of someone? He's caught off guard and fumbles some line about how her work caught his attention, but she presses, because I've met men like you before. I'm not going to be anyone's substitute. This is early, like before they're even close. And it sets such a strong foundation for her character. She doesn't want to be the tool that props up a broken man's ego. She wants to be chosen for herself. That line circles back so many times emotionally as the story goes on. Let's talk a bit about Su Lin Feng as a character, because he really anchors the whole thing. In his first timeline, he was this soft-hearted heir who thought loyalty meant never questioning the people you love. He cut off people who challenged his wife because he thought that was how you prove devotion. The rebirth doesn't turn him into some cold-blooded demon. It gives him this constant, simmering self-disgust. Every time he remembers how badly he misjudged things, you can see him fighting the urge to overcorrect hard. There are scenes where he's so sharp, so ruthless in meetings, you think he's overcompensating just to prove to himself that he's not that naive guy anymore. One of my favorite early sequences is when he starts preemptively blocking the business moves he knows will ruin his family in the old timeline. There's this investment his uncle pushes, involving a chemical plant project in a rural town, which in his old life led to some scandal, environmental damage, lawsuits, his dad's breakdown, the works. This time, Feng walks into the boardroom and just dismantles the whole plan with brutal clarity, throwing numbers and future predictions like he's reading a cheat sheet. The older executives are impressed but wary. His uncle is furious, and Feng, who used to be passive in these meetings, is suddenly laser-focused. But the show is smart. It doesn't present it as if his future knowledge is a free magic card. Every time he changes one thing, other things shift around it. The rival that bankrupted him in the previous timeline doesn't make the exact same move now that he's blocking them. They pivot, and he has to keep adapting. There's always the slight tension that maybe he'll still lose something important, just in a different way. That keeps the stakes alive. And layered under that corporate chess game is his guilt about Saif. The big punch in the gut reveal, which the drama slowly leads us toward, is that in his first life, he never actually met her as an adult, but his company did. That rural town with the chemical plant? That's where her family lived. He finds this out in the new timeline through a series of very painful discoveries. There's one late-night scene in his study where he's going through the old files, trying to see all the side effects the project had in the original run, and he finds an internal report about compensation claims. On the list of names, there's Saif, age 22, hospitalized, and next to it, a scribbled note from a lawyer basically instructing them to delay until the claimant gives up. And he remembers how, in his old future, that file never crossed his desk because Royan and her people filtered it. That's when the title of the show really lands emotionally. Tak lagi jadi Nona yang Salah. No longer making the wrong girl the one to blame, no longer choosing the wrong woman to protect while an innocent one dies in the background. He realizes that while he was busy defending his wife publicly from baseless rumors and screaming at the press, there was this young woman quietly fighting for basic justice, overlooked and destroyed by the machine that bore his family name. And he never even knew. It's actually worse than if he'd directly hurt her, because indifference can be so much more chilling than open cruelty. What makes his arc interesting is that he doesn't suddenly turn into this heroic savior for Saif just because he knows what happened. At first, he almost treats her like this living apology he needs to make. He's overprotective, overly generous, subtly trying to rearrange her life so all the bad things never come near her again. He buys out the building where her grandma's little rental room is to keep rent from going up, but he does it under some company shell so she doesn't know. He steers big clients toward her illustration work. He's playing God. And you know what? The drama calls him out on it. Hard. There's a scene around the middle where Saif finds out that he's been behind half the lucky breaks she's gotten. She goes from stunned to furious in about 3 seconds. She tells him, "I worked so hard to believe I got here on my own. Do you know what you just stole from me?" And that line cuts deep. For a guy who spent one lifetime losing everything, he doesn't understand at first that taking away someone's struggle can also be taking away their sense of self. That whole confrontation is so raw. She is crying, but not in this begging, pathetic way. It's this angry, betrayed, "I thought you saw me," not just your guilt kind of tears. And he just stands there silent because there is no defense. He did it. His intentions were warped, even if he meant well. Saif herself is honestly one of the better female leads I've seen in this sort of rebirth setup. From the description, you might think she's the classic pure white lotus who heals the broken CEO with her sunshine. She's really not. She's kind, yes, but it's a choice, not a default setting. You see moments where she wants to snap harder, where she's tempted to be selfish or petty, but she pulls herself back, not because good girls don't get angry, but because she's very clear about the person she wants to be. She's got this line with her best friend early on where she says, "If I let bitterness decide everything, I'm just handing my life over to people who hurt me. I don't like them that much." That made me laugh and hurt at the same time. Her backstory is rough without being misery porn. Her dad bailed early. Her mom worked herself sick, her grandma's the one constant. She's had people look down on her since school for being poor, for showing up to events in the same shoes 2 years in a row. So when this gilded heir keeps appearing in her orbit, part of her wants to punch him just for existing so comfortably. And the show actually gives her space to be resentful of wealth as a system, not just an individual. That's something I really appreciated. It's not like, oh, but he's a nice rich guy, so capitalism is okay. There are these quiet exchanges where she challenges him on the very structure of his world, and he has to either defend it or start tearing it down from the inside. And neither of those options is easy. Now, since I'm raving about characters, I've got to talk about Jiang Royan, the ex-wife, the ticking bomb in this new timeline. She is such a fascinating kind of awful. In too many dramas, the scheming ex is just this shrill caricature who exists to be slapped in slow motion. Here, Royan is terrifyingly calm. She grew up poor, she watched doors close in her face, and somewhere along the way she decided that love is an investment and people are ladders. Does that excuse what she does? Absolutely not. But the show lets you see her logic from the inside. We get small glimpses of her past in episode-long flashbacks scattered across the middle of the series. Not to make us feel sorry for her, but to make her believable. There's a scene of her as a teenager getting humiliated in an upscale store by the salesgirl, her cheap shoes squeaking on marble while everyone laughs. She goes home that day and looks in the mirror, and you see the moment she chooses. Never again. If they hurt me because I'm weak, then I won't be weak. The problem is, in her mind, not weak becomes use everyone before they use you. So, in the old timeline, when she meets Lin Feng, soft, trusting, rich, she clocks him immediately as both a resource and a shield. In the rebirth timeline, she starts sensing that something's off. The guy who once clung to her every word is suddenly distant. The engagement talks she expected to fall into place are delayed. And the actress plays that almost like a horror story from her perspective. Her carefully written script is being rewritten in front of her, and she doesn't know who's holding the pen. Her reaction is not instant rage, it's strategic. She adjusts her tactics. She plays more vulnerable. She tries to bump into him in coincidental ways. She even targets people around him, like his younger brother, to gain information. One really chilling moment. She volunteers at a charity event that Lin Excive's freelancing for, of all things. She accidentally spills coffee on one of Excive's pieces, apologizes profusely, offers to pay for damages, all while quietly analyzing how close Excive and Lin Feng are. Watching these two women circle each other, neither fully sure of the other's role yet, is tension gold. Excive senses something is off in Royan's smile, but she can't place it. Lin Feng, when he shows up later and sees them in the same room, looks like he's seeing a grenade in his living room. Let me talk about the acting here for a second, because this kind of dynamic only works if the cast can sell micromotions. The actor playing Su Lin Feng carries that I remember an entire lifetime of failure weight in his posture. He sits like a man who's used to losing things, slightly hunched, like he's braced for bad news, except in business meetings where he straightens up and almost puts on a mask as armor. Watch his eyes in scenes with his father and younger brother versus scenes with Royan. With family, there's always this tiny flicker of gratitude and panic, like he's constantly trying to mentally screenshot these moments because he lost them once already. With Royan, his gaze is flat, careful, like he's walking a line between hatred and caution. But then with Excive, especially as they grow closer, his eyes soften in a way that honestly makes some of those rooftop scenes way more intimate than the actual physical skinship. The actress playing Lin Excive honestly walked away with the show for me. She gives Excive this grounded warmth, like a person you could actually meet. Her smile isn't this generic Cinderella smile. It's lopsided and sometimes stiff when she's trying to be brave. The way she does crying scenes, she actually gets that ugly, splotchy look that real people get, and her voice cracks mid-sentence. There's a scene where her grandma collapses and she's in the hospital hallway, phone in hand, making frantic calls trying to figure out how to pay the deposit. And her fear is so raw that I had to pause and collect myself. It's not pretty, it's desperate. Then Lin Feng shows up, and the way she tries to pull herself together in front of him, forcing this weird little smile like, "I'm fine, it's just a routine check," while her hand is still shaking. That's the kind of detail that makes a character feel alive. As for Royan, her actress absolutely nails the performative gentleness thing. There's one early episode where she goes to the Su house with homemade soup for Lin Feng's dad. In the old timeline, this was what won the elders over. In the new one, we as the audience know it's manipulation. But she doesn't play it as cartoonish. Her tone is exactly right. Her movements are slightly too polished, like she's practiced them. When she gets caught in a lie later, the way her face switches from soft concern to cold calculation in under a second, I actually felt a chill. Now, chemistry. This show is a slow burn, and I mean that in the most agonizing way. There's an entire stretch of episodes where if you're the kind of viewer who wants kisses and confessions by episode 8, you might be screaming. But if you enjoy emotional intimacy, the tiny gestures, the silent, "I'm on your side" kind of closeness, you'll be feasting. One of my favorite moments isn't even romantic in the obvious sense. It's when Ixive and Lin Feng are stuck in a small town overnight because of a storm, and they end up sheltering in this half-finished community center his company is funding. It's late, the power keeps flickering, and they're sitting on opposite sides of the room at first, both slightly awkward. Eventually they end up talking about regrets, and Ixive says, "If you could go back and fix one thing, would you?" He goes very quiet and just says, "One thing wouldn't be enough." He's staring at the floor, and you can see his fists clenching, flashes of his first death scene, the headlines, his father's funeral, everything. She doesn't push. She doesn't try to psychoanalyze him. She just scoots a little closer and sits there, not touching him, but close enough that if he wanted to say more, he could. That's chemistry. That gentle space holding. Later, when they do finally confess, it feels earned. It's not this big grand gesture in front of a crowd. It's raw and a bit messy. They're arguing, actually. She's accusing him of still hiding too much, of treating her like someone he has to shield from every truth. And he just blurts out, "Because the last time I didn't protect you, you died." He doesn't explain the rebirth thing yet, but in his panic, he says the quiet part out loud. She of course has no idea what he means, but she can tell it's not just metaphorical. There's this silence, then she says very softly, "I'm right here. I'm not dead. I'm choosing you now. Can you choose me like this, not the version of me in your nightmares?" And honestly, that dialogue slapped harder than any ring proposal could. Let's get into the technical side for a bit, because this drama is very intentional visually. The cinematography uses color in a way that's actually quite clever without being, "Look, we have symbolism," obvious. His first life, in flashbacks, is shot in cooler tones, lots of glass, blue filters, harsh white lights in corporate spaces. Even the home scenes with Royan feel a bit sterile, all sleek marble and cold grays. In the second life, especially in early episodes, the palette is warmer but also more contrasted. Sunrises look almost too golden. The Su family home at breakfast has this cozy yellowish cast that screams this is what he's trying to protect this time. Meanwhile, whenever we're in scenes where Lin Feng is slipping into his old pattern of control or manipulation, the light gets sharper, shadows more defined. You may not consciously clock it, but emotionally you feel that shift. And don't even get me started on the way they frame Lin Ixive. When she's alone in her own spaces, her tiny room, her art desk, the bus, the camera often sits at her eye level, slightly handheld, so you feel like you're right there. There's a softness to those shots, with shallow depth of field focusing on little things like her pencils, her grandma's hands, the steam from instant noodles. When she steps into Lin Feng's world, the angels suddenly change. They shoot her from slightly below sometimes, emphasizing how tall the buildings are around her, how out of place she feels. It's not degrading, it's just visually emphasizing the power imbalance. As she gains more agency and confidence later, those angels level out. It's subtle, but it's there. The editing choices are also interesting. The show loves to do these match cuts between past and present that actually serve the story rather than just looking pretty. For example, there's a scene where Feng signs a contract in the new timeline, except this time he's making sure it doesn't screw over a smaller partner. As his pen hits the paper, we cut to his past life signing something else, the very contract that handed absolute power to Royan. The two signatures overlap on screen for a second before we drop back into the present. It visually reinforces that he's not just making random business moves, he's trying to rewrite his own history, line by line. Also, the sound design in this drama is way better than it needed to be for a romance revenge story. They use silence like a weapon. In those heavy emotional confrontations, the background score falls away completely, leaving you with just breathing, maybe a clock ticking, maybe some distant traffic. There's a moment where Feng is sitting alone in the old villa where he met Exive as a child, realizing fully who she is and what happened to her in his first life. No music. You just hear the wind creaking through broken window frames, a dog barking somewhere far off, and his own slightly ragged breathing. It makes the guilt settle into your bones instead of just sailing past you. Speaking of music, though, the OST is exactly the kind of heart-clenching piano and strings combo you'd expect, but a few tracks really stand out. The main theme is this melancholic song sung by a female vocalist with a slightly husky tone. The lyrics talk about, if I could choose again, I'd walk slower past you, so I'd remember, very on the nose for a rebirth drama. But somehow it works because they don't overplay it. They save the full chorus for key moments. His realization of her past suffering, her decision to trust him despite all the red flags, and yes, that final episode scene, which I'm not even going to touch yet, because that's a whole meltdown of its own. I also appreciate that they have a lighter, almost whimsical motif for Exive's everyday life. A little acoustic guitar riff, some soft percussion. It pops up when she's sketching, cooking with her grandma, or goofing around with her best friend. Then, in later episodes, when those worlds collide and Feng enters her space more permanently, you start hearing that motif mix subtly under scenes where he's present in her home. It's like the sound is telling you he's not just visiting anymore, he's becoming part of her rhythm. Let's circle back to the narrative structure because it's not just a straight line of he died, he came back, now he wins. The show breaks the story into almost 3 emotional arcs: repentance, resistance, and rebuilding. The first chunk, roughly episodes 1 to 10, is very much about his internal turmoil and shock. He's protecting his family from the obvious landmines he remembers, tentatively circling Exive, keeping Royan at arm's length. There's this constant question: is he going to tell anyone the truth about his rebirth? The answer, for a long time, is no, which creates its own set of problems. Secrets have a way of rotting everything around them. The middle arc, say episodes 11 to 22, is where things get messy, in a good way. His relationships start cracking under the strain of half-truths. His father notices the sudden drastic changes in his corporate strategy and starts suspecting ulterior motives. His younger brother, Su Minghao, who, by the way, is such an unexpectedly great character. This goofy younger brother, who in the first life went totally off the rails, starts to feel overshadowed all over again and pick some very bad friends. Exive, meanwhile, is struggling with her own pride versus practical survival. Does she accept help from this man who clearly cares, or does she push him away to stay independent? And Jiang Royan steps up her game, recruiting outside allies, leaking half-truth stories to the press, setting up scenarios that echo the first timeline, but with slightly different players. One standout stretch in that middle portion involves an online scandal. Because of course there's an online scandal, it's 2026, what did we expect? A manipulated photo surfaces, making it look like Exive is some homewrecker clinging to a rich married man. In the first life, you remember, there were rumors like this about some woman from the countryside, that Lin Feng's team crushed to protect Royan's pristine image. Now, in this new life, history tries to repeat itself from a different angle. Watching him face the exact same type of media frenzy, but with the roles reversed, is honestly chilling. The way he reacts this time is not instantly perfect, either, which I really liked. His first instinct, and this is very in character, is to go full damage control. Hire PR firms, scrub the internet, issue a sterile statement calling it a misunderstanding. He's operating on autopilot from his old CEO training. But when Exive sees the bland statement, she's devastated. A misunderstanding? She asks. So I'm just a PR problem to be managed? That confrontation forces him to realize that if he wants to stop repeating the cycle, he can't keep using the same methods under a different banner. Eventually, and this scene is so satisfying, he goes on record himself, not just denying the rumor but naming her, acknowledging the relationship, staking his reputation on truth instead of spin. For a man with his background, that's a huge, risky step, and it feels like genuine growth rather than a stock hero clears the name of the heroine moment. And we have to talk about Su Minghao for a minute, because a lesser show would have left him as comic relief or a tragic backstory footnote. In Lin Feng's first life, Minghao spiraled into addiction and shady side deals after being constantly overshadowed and then scapegoated when the company collapsed. That guilt sits heavy on Lin Feng in the new timeline, and his attempts to save his brother are another place where good intentions nearly wreck things. At first, Lin Feng micromanages him like crazy, pulls him out of social circles, monitors his spending, shuts down his minor projects because he deems them too risky. Minghao understandably rebels. From his point of view, his older brother just turned into an overbearing control freak overnight. And the writing actually lets Minghao be right about some things. There's a fantastic blow-up where he screams, "You say you want to protect me, but you don't even respect me. I'd rather fall on my face than be your shadow." And honestly, fair. That's the moment Lin Feng realizes he's not the only one who needs a second chance. Other people deserve the space to make mistakes too. Later, instead of interfering, he offers mentorship, transparency, and, key thing, he apologizes specifically, not just "sorry I upset you," but "I'm sorry I didn't see you as your own person." That line stuck with me. Stylistically, the directing in those family scenes is so grounded. No slow-motion slap theatrics, thank God. Fights happen in cramped hallways, over dinner tables, in offices with fluorescent lighting. That choice makes the echo to real families stronger. Because most of us don't have our big emotional confrontations standing in the rain outside a mansion, we have them over cold food and half-finished sentences. On the topic of visual choices again, there's a repeated motif of doors in this drama. I know that sounds like film student overthinking, but it's really there. We constantly see characters framed in doorways, eavesdropping behind slightly open doors, closing doors on each other. There's this early shot of young Lin Feng holding a door half open while his dad swears at someone on the phone, telling him to go back to bed. In the first life, he walked away. In the second, there's a parallel scene, but he steps through the doorway instead, offers to help, joins the conversation. Visually, it mirrors his choice to engage instead of withdrawing. And don't even get me started on the late series scene where Exive literally locks a door between herself and Lin Feng after a particularly heavy lie comes out, only for him to sit down outside and talk to her through it instead of trying to break in. That kind of staging says so much without any overblown dialogue. The dialogue itself is surprisingly sharp most of the time. Of course, it has its share of melodramatic lines. This is a rebirth drama. I expected at least one, "If fate is cruel, I'll be crueler" speech. But the bulk of it is grounded in very human fears. What if I mess it up again? What if I can't forgive myself? What if loving you means hurting you? One little exchange I adored is when Exive asks Lin Feng, "Do you think people can really change?" And he answers, "I don't know. I only know regret changes you, whether you like it or not." It's simple, but in the context of everything he's carrying, it lands heavy. There are also some genuinely funny lines which you need in a story this heavy. Zhang Qiao, Lin Feng's long-suffering assistant, is basically the audience's voice half the time. There's this scene where he walks in on Lin Feng staring at his phone, clearly debating whether to text Exai first. Zhang Qiao deadpans, "Sir, this is the 4th time you've opened and closed her chat in 5 minutes. If you're going to reject your past life, at least reject it with some riz." I actually snorted. Those little modern jokes keep the show from suffocating you under angst. Speaking of Zhang Qiao, the supporting cast overall is way more fleshed out than I expected. Exai's best friend, Mei Lan, isn't just the sassy sidekick. She has her own romantic disappointment arc, her own career crossroads. There's a whole mini-plot where she's offered a stable, boring office job that would mean giving up on her indie cafe dream, and Exai, instead of doing the usual drama thing of chanting, "Follow your dream, money doesn't matter," actually sits down with her and does a budget breakdown on paper. They talk very frankly about burnout, about how chasing passion when you're broke hits differently. That conversation felt so real it almost hurt. The show doesn't shame any choice. In the end, Mei Lan decides on a compromise route that makes sense for her, not just what makes a cute montage. Even the so-called villains beyond Royan have shades. There's a senior executive who in the first life helped oust the Su family from their own company. In this timeline, once Lin Feng starts making waves, we see him not as some mustache-twirling traitor, but as a man who's been passed over, resentful, yes, but also genuinely concerned about risky shifts in company policy. When Lin Feng finally confronts him, they have this low-key, almost civil argument about what a corporation owes to society versus its shareholders. It's not evil versus good, it's two worldviews clashing, profit at all costs versus responsibility, even when it cuts into short-term gain. For a show that easily could have just made him the bad board member, giving him a coherent point of view was a nice surprise. Now, not everything is perfect. I'll get into more of what didn't quite work for me later. But even in this first chunk of thoughts, I have to mention the pacing wobble around the late teens episodes. You can feel the script struggling a bit to stretch certain conflicts. There's a stretch where the same misunderstanding between Lin Feng and Exai gets replayed in slightly different settings. She feels lied to. He wants to tell the truth but holds back. She pulls away. He broods. And after the 3rd iteration, I was like, okay, writers, we get it, therapy is needed. Move. The only reason it's bearable is because the actors keep finding new notes in those conversations, but structurally, you could have trimmed an episode or two there. Still, I do appreciate that even when the story circles a bit, it usually adds some new information. A side character's motivation, a small reveal about what happened in the old timeline, or a hint of the cosmic rules of this rebirth. Because yes, the show doesn't entirely ignore the question of why did he come back? It's not heavily fantasy, but there are hints. There's this recurring older woman who appears in crowd scenes, at the hospital, at the library, outside the courthouse, always watching Lin Feng at key turning points. At first, you think she's just a background extra your brain happens to latch onto, but then the camera lingers one beat too long. Later, Exai mentions seeing that nice auntie giving her directions when she was lost years ago. The implications are interesting. The show never goes full-on guardian angel with her, but it drops just enough breadcrumbs for you to speculate whether there's some force keeping score of Lin Feng's choices this time. There's a haunting scene where he goes back to that rural town from the chemical plant project and runs into this same woman sitting by a small shrine. She says something like, when the living can't carry their regrets, sometimes the years bend for them. But bending isn't breaking. If you walk the same way again, the road won't move for you twice. It's cryptic as hell, but it reframes the rebirth not as a guaranteed happy ending, but as a conditional chance, change or suffer again. And that brings me to one of the most interesting things about Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah. It's obsessed with responsibility. Whose fault was the first life's tragedy? The easy answer is the evil wife ruined him. And sure, Jiang Royan did terrible, unforgivable things. But the show keeps poking. Why was he so blind? Why did the system let her win? Why was it so simple for one woman to redirect an entire corporation's moral compass? It never fully absolves Lin Feng with a victim of manipulation label. There's a scene where Exive bluntly tells him, after learning more of his past, "You were hurt, but you also hurt people. If you want forgiveness, at least look them in the eye in your own mind." That line knocked the air out of me. The social commentary sneaks in mostly through these personal confrontations rather than heavy monologues. We see how easy it was, in his first life, for tabloids to paint a faceless other woman as the cause of all his troubles. That's what the title riffs on, the wrong lady in public stories. Women are so often placed into easy archetypes: the innocent wife, the homewrecker, the gold digger. Tak lagi jadi Nona yang Salah basically flips the table and says, actually, labels are lazy, and the man in the middle has more agency than he pretends. In the new timeline, when the media tries the same trick, blaming an unnamed female figure for corporate chaos, Lin Feng's refusal to let them scapegoat some random girl feels like him consciously writing a different script this time. Visually, they even highlight this through mirrors and reflections. In multiple episodes, we see headlines reflected in glass, distorted. In one particularly clever shot, we see two different news segments on different TVs in an electronics store, one vilifying a mysterious young woman, the other discussing investor fraud. People in the store only watch the scandal, not the fraud. The show isn't subtle about what it thinks our society tends to prioritize, but honestly, I kind of like that it just goes for it. And yeah, while all that heavy thematic stuff is happening, there's still the romance threading through everything, which somehow stays tender even when surrounded by lawsuits and corporate takeovers. One of the gentlest recurring bits is their little ritual with coffee. At first, Exive brings him cheap convenience store coffee in a paper cup when he's pulling an all-nighter at the office, calling it inspiration fuel. He grimaces at the taste, but drinks it because she's watching. Later, when things between them get rocky, there's a morning where she leaves a cup outside his office without knocking. He sees it, watches through the glass as she walks away, and there's this hesitant look like he wants to chase her but can't. Much later still, after he finally comes clean about everything, he appears at her place with a thermos of coffee he brewed himself, saying, "I can't go back and drink what you gave me the first time properly, but I can at least make this for you now." It's such a simple callback, but I swear it hit harder than some of the big declarations. Costume design plays a quieter but important role here as well. Lin Feng's wardrobe shifts slowly over the episodes, and not just in the obvious, he stops wearing pure black all the time way. In the very beginning, post-rebirth, his suits are razor sharp, dark, very controlled, 3Ps, perfect tie knots, almost like he's armoring himself. As he starts letting people in again, you see him in softer fabrics, occasionally ditching the tie, even wearing this light sweater in one home scene that made me do a double take because he actually looked like a human being instead of a corporate statue. Exive's clothes move subtly in the opposite direction, from mismatched, obviously budget-constrained outfits to more cohesive looks as her career stabilizes. She never suddenly turns into some haute couture queen, thank God. But there's a visible growth in how much space she allows herself to take up. The set design for her world is probably my favorite though. Her room is tiny, but it looks lived in. Post-its, scuffed walls, plants barely hanging on, a cluttered desk with both art tools and unpaid bills. It's not the Instagram version of poverty. It's real, slightly messy, sometimes claustrophobic. Opposite that, the Su family house is the classic rich drama mansion. But they sneak in enough quirks, a slightly dated painting his dad refuses to take down, worn spots on the stair rail where people actually touch it, to keep it from feeling like a showroom. We also get a good look at the cold corporate world through location choices. Glass-walled boardrooms, fancy restaurants where alliances and betrayals happen over wine, hospital VIP suites that feel more like hotels. There's a conscious contrast between spaces where power is executed and spaces where emotion is allowed to breathe. For example, Some of the most honest conversations happen on rooftops, in stairwells, at roadside food stalls, places with bad lighting and noise, where no one's performing for anyone. And you know what? I have to give the director credit for resisting certain typical shots. You know the one, heroine crying in the rain, camera spinning around her, male lead appearing with an umbrella in slow motion? We don't get that here. There is rain, obviously, because drama law requires at least one rain scene. But when it comes, they use it for this really grounded beat. Exive waiting alone at a bus stop, soaked because her cheap umbrella broke, on a day where everything has already gone wrong. Lin Feng pulls up, sees her, offers a ride. She hesitates, eventually gets in. There's no swelling music, no witty banter. They just sit there, wet and exhausted, listening to the vipers. That quiet shared misery feels way more intimate than any orchestrated umbrella hero shot. I'm realizing I've talked for this long and haven't even touched the specifics of the ending or some of the bigger twists that hit later, especially around the courtroom arc and the final confrontation with Royan and the board. Those need their own deep dive because the way the show resolves the question of how much is enough payback is complicated in a way I wasn't fully expecting from how it started. So let me pause here on the breakdown of vibes, characters, and craft. And next I want to pull apart those final episodes, the choices they made with Royan's fate, how far they pushed the legal realism, and most importantly, whether the payoff for all of Lin Feng's second chance choices actually feels emotionally earned or just morally tidy. Alright, so let's talk about that whole third act pivot, because this is where Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah stops being just CEO, gets a redo, and picks the sweet girl instead, and turns into, okay, but what are you actually going to do about the bodies your empire is standing on? The trigger, funnily enough, is not Royan directly. It's that damn chemical plant project again, the ghost of his first life that refuses to stay buried. Remember how in this timeline he blocked the exact same investment early on? He thinks he's sidestepped it. He's so sure he's untangled that knot. And then, in episode 20-something, a new segment comes on in the background while he's cooking with Exive in her tiny kitchen, this cheerful little domestic scene. And on the TV behind them, there's footage of a protest in that same rural town. Different company logo on the banners this time, different executives, but the factory? It's the same permit he originally turned down. Another corporation just swooped in and took it. He doesn't even notice at first. Exive, who is half listening while chopping vegetables, recognizes the town's name and freezes. The camera does the slow push-in on her face as the reporter mentions water contamination and sick residents. She walks over, turns up the volume, and the sound in the scene just drains. We get flashes of her memory, her grandma boiling cloudy water, her mother coughing in a hospital bed. Lin Feng is still stirring a pan behind her, completely unaware that his fix in this life just rerouted the disaster instead of preventing it. I actually wanted to throw something at the screen at that point, because that is exactly how systemic problems behave in real life. One rich guy having a conscience doesn't magically heal an entire industry. This is where the show does something really smart with his rebirth concept. It refuses to let him treat the past like a puzzle game where you can just move a few pieces and get a perfect ending. The universe is like, oh, you stopped your family from doing it? Cool. Someone else was waiting in line. It forces him to widen his idea of responsibility beyond his immediate circle. He has this huge argument with his father about it. Dad is basically, we rejected that project. We did the right thing. The rest isn't our problem. And you can see younger life Lin Feng in his eyes for a second, that same old instinct to say, yeah, true. Not a mess. Except he can't now, because he remembers the first life where that rationalization almost destroyed everything. He slams his hand on the table and says, you think we can wash our hands just because the contract has someone else's stamp? We knew what that factory would do. We just pretended saying no was enough. That line is messy and angry and so on point. It's him finally freaking out at the idea that moral responsibility doesn't end at the boundary of your legal liability. And of course, because drama gods love collateral pain, this is also the stretch where Excive's grandma's health starts sliding down fast. It's not sudden. They've been hinting at it from early on, the little coughs, the pills, the "I'm fine, just old bones" deflections. But the protest news basically rips open a wound Excive has spent years carefully bandaging. She goes into this almost robotic mode after watching the coverage. She starts filing through old documents, digging up hospital records from her hometown. And that's when she stumbles on something we've been waiting for her to see: the original compensation claim paperwork with the Sioux Group's logo stamped on top. Even though in this timeline that claim technically never went through because the project shifted companies, the ghost of his first life lands in her lap on paper. The way the show stages her discovery is so simple but cruel. She's alone, sitting on the floor of her room, because there's no table space, papers everywhere. She sees the Sioux logo, frowns, flips to the note about delaying claims until publicity dies down, and spots the signature of an old executive who now smiles at her in boardroom meetings as Lin Feng's friend. Her face doesn't even crumple at first. She just goes very, very still. Then she flips the next page and sees her own teenage signature, shaky in blue ink, next to her mother's. That's when the breath leaves her. What kills me is that, technically, this is a relic from the timeline that is no longer canon in this life. But emotionally, it doesn't matter. For her, the past is not theory, it's lived. And the show doesn't try to over-explain how this document exists now, it kind of lets the bendy time logic blur there. Maybe that claim file is one of those pieces of fate that clung to the edges when the years twisted. They never directly say it, and I kind of like that they don't. It adds this airy sense that consequences don't fully vanish just because someone gets a do-over. When she confronts Lin Feng with it, that scene wrecked me. She doesn't storm into his office dramatically. She waits until he comes over one evening with that thermos of coffee I mentioned before. She opens the door, hands him the folder without a word, and steps back. He flips through, recognizes the form instantly, and you can literally see all the color drain from his face. Not because he's guilty in this specific reality, but because this is his hell printed out. He tries to explain, badly, at first. He goes into technicalities. Different timeline, different decisions, he never approved it this time. And she just cuts him off. Stop talking about this time and last time like they're games. Someone signed this with your family's name. My mother died while that file gathered dust. I don't care what year it was when it happened. The actress delivers that with this quiet, terrifying steadiness that honestly hits harder than a screaming fit would have. She's not even looking at him half the time. She's looking at that logo. This is also the moment he realizes he can't keep the rebirth secret if he wants her to truly understand him. The whole house of cards is collapsing. You see him open his mouth, close it, turn away, press his hand to his face like he's trying not to scream. And then he just says, very small, I remember you dying. That's how he starts. No dramatic, I was reborn 10 years ago, speech. Just that one sentence. The confession scene is long, and thank God they let it breathe. They don't do some gimmicky flash montage of his first life. We've already been getting those in pieces. He talks. He stumbles, backtracks, grips the back of a chair so hard his knuckles whiten. He tells her about his death, about Royan's betrayal, about all the people he lost, and then about finding her in the second life and realizing, piece by piece, what his company did in the old one. The camera doesn't cut away to some cosmic light show or a judge from the heavens nodding approval. It stays on their faces, because the magic isn't the time travel. It's what it does to two regular people trying to figure out what the hell to do with that knowledge. Exive's reactions go through a full grief cycle in about 10 minutes. There's disbelief, obviously, because what do you even do when your boyfriend drops, by the way, I died once already, on a random Tuesday. Then there's anger at the sheer audacity of him carrying all this without telling her sooner. She says at one point, you talk about me dying like I'm a story you read somewhere. I was living that. That's so important. He's talking from this strange perspective of someone who remembers outcomes that technically haven't happened now, and she has to drag him back to the fact that, either way, her suffering wasn't theoretical. But then there's this unexpected beat where she actually believes him, not because he begs or swears, but because too many little details line up that she could never have told him. He describes the layout of her childhood house, down to the crack in the window, talks about the smell of the river near the plant, mentions a specific nurse who took care of her mom. The show resists the urge to make it some fated soulmate memory thing and instead roots it in his guilt. He read those case files obsessively in the first life after it was too late, trying to understand the human cost. When she realizes that, you can see something in her shift. Her image of him expands from rich meddling in my life to man drowning in more regret than I knew existed. Does that mean she forgives him instantly? Absolutely not. And that's where I really respect the writing. She doesn't fling herself into his arms sobbing, "You suffered so much, let me heal you," which would have destroyed the whole premise. She tells him, eyes full of tears, "I don't know what to do with this. I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm sorry for you, against my will. I need time." Then she does the one thing he's most afraid of. She asks him to leave. The next few episodes, they actually spend a decent chunk of time apart. Not break up in the dramatic sense like never see you again, but this heavy emotional distance where texts go unanswered, calls get declined, and when they bump into each other at work functions, the air is thick enough to slice. And this is not just angst for angst's sake. It gives both of them space to decide who they want to be now that all the cards are on the table. On his side, this is where the legal arc kicks into high gear. Because after that confrontation, just being a better boyfriend isn't enough. The old claim form sitting on her table is physical proof that his company once played dirty with people like her. Even if technically different lifetime, a version of that corporation still exists in the public record. He could have shoved it in a drawer and told himself, well, that was the old timeline, not my responsibility. Instead, he does something that honestly shocked me. He goes to the company's legal department, slams the file down, and says, "We need to reopen every single claim related to that factory, especially the ones we buried." There's a beat where the head of legal stares at him like he's lost his damn mind. Because financially, this is suicide. You're talking about voluntarily digging up potential liabilities years after the statute of limitations, for some of them may have even passed, inviting bad press, inviting copycat suits. From a cold business perspective, this is the stupidest move. And the drama doesn't pretend otherwise. Everyone around him thinks he's gone off the rails. His uncle calls him insane. Board members start whispering about a vote of no confidence. His father, who's been slowly warming to his reformist tendencies, looks genuinely frightened now. He says, "Do you want to destroy everything we built?" And here's where that line between revenge story and redemption story becomes crystal clear. In the first half, his driving force is "I won't let Royan ruin us again." That's revenge colored. In this half, his obsession is "I won't pretend we're innocent when we're not." That's something else entirely. Accountability. And it's not glamorous. There's no guarantee he wins. Watching a CEO choose that, fully aware that it might cost him his position, is way more interesting to me than watching him outmaneuver a board through clever contracts. The legal stuff itself is, okay, not always perfectly realistic. There are a few too convenient moments where documents are found a little too easily, or a whistleblower shows up right when they're needed. But they at least try to ground you in the actual fight. There are scenes with lawyers arguing about jurisdiction, ethics committees, the statute of limitations on environmental cases. They bring in local residents as witnesses, including this old man whose farm was ruined. He gives this monologue in court about how a man who spills poison in the river doesn't get to say "time's up" just because the calendar changed. It's obvious speech writing, sure, but delivered with so much quiet pain that it lands. Royan, naturally, is not about to go quietly while he turns himself into some crusader. She's got skin in the game. A bunch of the old shady deals were run through shell companies she controlled in the first life. The moment she realizes he's looking backwards, not just forwards, her self-preservation kicks into beast mode. She was already angry that he broke the engagement trajectory, jealous that he chose Exive, resentful that he's no longer pliable. Now he's also threatening to expose the kind of tactics she's always used to climb. For her, this is war. She tries subtle sabotage first. Leaks to the media framing his reopen the claims move as some ploy to distract from its secret scandal. Planting stories about him being mentally unstable, reusing the exact same erratic CEO narrative that destroyed him in the first life. Those parallels are brutal. You watch news anchors use almost the same phrases, talking heads speculating whether he's fit to lead, and you can feel him relive that downward spiral in his bones. The difference now is that he has at least a handful of people in his corner who know the full picture, or close to it. One underrated MVP here is his father. I honestly thought the dad would stay in that stubborn patriarch lane all the way through. The classic, I don't understand your new morality, you're threatening the bloodline, you're not my son, vibe. But they actually let him grow. There's this scene, right after the board suggests ousting Lin Feng, where the father sits alone in his study watching an old home video. It's young Lin Feng at some school recital, stumbling over a speech about wanting to build something that helps people. The dad chuckles at the kid's bad haircut, then rewinds and rewinds the word, helps. The show doesn't spell it out, but you get it. He's realizing that somewhere along the way, their measure of success narrowed to profit and nothing else. The next board meeting, when they bring up a vote to strip Lin Feng of CEO power, the father does something I didn't see coming. He abstains. Not a full show of support, he's not a personality transplant, but he refuses to add his weight to the ousting. He says, if we taught him that this family only takes and never gives back, then maybe this mess is also on me. That humbling? That's huge for his character. And it's done in this very clipped, prideful way that still feels true to him. Meanwhile, Exive is fighting her own battle outside the boardrooms. She's not just sitting at home waiting for updates, thank God. That claim form she found? She turns it into action. She goes back to her hometown with a camera and a sketchbook, starts collecting testimonies from people who never got their day in court. The episodes where she's walking through familiar streets, filming polluted streams, drawing the faces of residents as part of a digital exhibit, are some of the strongest in the whole show. There's this montage where her illustrations are intercut with real legal files, human stories versus dry documents, and it hits. Her art, which up to this point has mostly been her survival job, suddenly becomes weaponized truth. At first, she keeps all this separate from Lin Feng. She's still furious, still unsure how to stand near him without wanting to simultaneously comfort and slap him. But of course their paths cross because story structure demands it. A small NGO picks up her project and partners with a larger firm to bring a class action. Guess whose legal department that firm has quietly contracted for consultation? Yeah, his. Their reunion in that context, across a conference table with lawyers and PowerPoints around them, is icy. He walks in, sees her among the plaintiffs, and there's this micro beat where his whole face lights up because he's missed her, then shudders when he realizes why she's there. She looks him dead in the eye and says, "Today, I'm not here as your anything. I'm here as someone your company hurt. Can you respect that?" And to his credit, he nods and sits down like she just slapped a judge's robe on herself. The courtroom arc that follows might be a bit dramatized, but it's emotionally satisfying. One of the tightest moments is when the opposing lawyer tries to frame the whole tragedy as inevitable collateral of development, using all the usual corporate euphemisms. Exive is on the stand, and he basically implies that maybe her mother's illness wasn't even related to the factory. You can see her jaw clench. For a second it looks like she'll break down. Instead, she pulls out one of her drawings, a sketch she made as a teenager of her mother lying in the hospital bed with machines strapped everywhere, and says, "I drew this the night a doctor told me our water was poison. It was the only way I knew how to remember it." You can argue about evidence, But you can't argue me out of my own memory. Is that how actual court works? Not exactly. Would any judge allow a random sketch as evidence like that? Probably not without groundwork. But thematically, it's perfect. This entire show is about memory and what you do with it. Lin Feng has a whole extra life's worth of it. Exive has this one scar timeline. In that moment, her single life's pain is weighted just as heavily as his accumulated regret. That balance feels right. Now, Royan's unraveling in parallel is some of the best villain comeuppance I've seen in a while, not because she gets thrown off a metaphorical cliff, but because the thing she values most, control of her own narrative, slips out of her hands. She tries to spin the trial as his vanity project, leaks doctored audio clips implying he's using victims for personal redemption. When that starts to fail, she pivots to appealing to his old weakness. She shows up late at night, all soft voice and teary eyes, whispering, "We can still fix this together. We were a good team once." And for one terrifying second, the show lets him wobble. You see him look at her and flash back to certain good moments in their first life. Her taking care of him when he was ill, them laughing over burnt toast, the feeling of not being alone. Because even in a toxic relationship, there are good moments. That's what keeps people trapped. They don't retcon their entire past as purely evil. That's such a brave choice. Royan was not a cartoon villain 24/7. She probably did care sometimes, in her own twisted way. The danger is him forgetting the cost of that care. But then, and this is one of my favorite little acting choices from him, his gaze drops to her hands. In his memory, those are the hands that let his own slip off a balcony rail, metaphorically speaking. He notices that even now, while pleading, her fingers are perfectly steady. No real fear, just performance. He quietly says, "The worst mistake of my life was believing you were my only option." That's it. No screaming, just a door closing, emotionally and literally, as he walks away and leaves her in the corridor. Her final fall is not a single dramatic arrest scene but death by 1,000 exposures. The court case drags out documents that tie her shell company to backdoor payments. A junior accountant, she bullied, flips and testifies. Her carefully curated public image as charitable socialite starts to crack as old coworkers leak stories of how she treated them. The line that really nails her, though, comes from Exive, not Lin Feng. After everything comes out, they cross paths one last time in a bathroom at a hotel, of all places, which is such a beautifully unglamorous meeting point. Royan looks wrecked but still defiant. She throws this jab like, "Enjoy your victory. You stole what was supposed to be mine." And Exive, tired beyond measure, replies, "I didn't steal him. You just never owned him the way you thought you did. That's your tragedy." It's not delivered with gloating. It's almost pitying. For a second, you glimpse what Royan could have been if she'd chosen to see people as, well, people, not assets. Do they send Royan to jail? Yes, but not in this morally explosive, rot in prison sense. The show doesn't linger gleefully on her being led away. There's a short news clip, some legal jargon about fraud and obstruction. The more poignant image is her sitting alone in an interrogation room, perfectly lit, no makeup, staring down at her reflection in the metallic table. No one screams at her there. No one throws water. She just has to sit with herself. That feels more in line with the show's obsession with inner reckoning. Okay, back to our central couple. Because by now you're probably wondering, so do they actually patch things up? Or is this all just moral philosophy and no kissing? They do, but it's not tied to winning the lawsuit or taking down Royan. Their reconciliation happens in a quieter interlude, which I love, because it separates their personal healing from the public battle. It's after a hearing where testimony went especially badly for the victims, a procedural delay, some technical objection that sets things back months. Everyone's exhausted. Exive stays behind in the empty courtroom, sitting in the back row, staring at the judge's bench like it's a mountain. Lin Feng comes in, having waited outside the door, clearly unsure if he's allowed to approach. He sits a few rows behind her at first, giving her literal space. That staging is so intentional. After a long silence, he says, I spent one whole life running away from responsibility and another trying to pay debt like a bill. Neither way brought anyone back. He's not asking for anything, not even forgiveness. He's just reflecting aloud. Then he adds, I don't know how to live a third way yet, but I want to try. If that's not with you, I'll still try. That last sentence is the key. This is the first time he tells her his determination to do better isn't contingent on getting the girl, and that's precisely why she finally starts to believe him. You see her shoulders loosen just a bit. She turns around, eyes red, and says, You idiot. There is no third life. It sounds harsh, but there's this tiny crack of fondness in her voice. She moves up a row, so they're now sitting side by side, but still not touching. For this drama, that little movement is basically a full embrace. Later, much later, when they do share an actual, fully conscious, no misunderstanding kiss, it's not after a heroic speech or a victory parade. It's at her grandma's memorial. I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. Yes, they kill the grandma. Of course they do. It's a drama. Elderly loving caregivers have expiry dates apparently. But the way they do it, and how it feeds into their relationship, is actually really tender. Her passing is not some shock twist. The woman herself spends her last few episodes sensing her time is short, making jokes about it, meddling one last time in Xive's love life. There's this adorable scene where she calls Lin Feng over under the pretense of asking about her medicine, then promptly leaves the room so he and Xive are stuck together in awkward silence. Classic grandma move. But in private, she also tells Xive, don't spend your whole life being strong for my sake. I'm leaving so you can be soft sometimes too. That line killed me. At the memorial, after everyone's gone, Xive stays behind arranging flowers, hands shaking. Lin Feng comes in, quietly lights an incense stick, bows. No grand speech, just shared grief. And in that exhausted, raw space, they finally stop dancing around the fact that they still love each other. She says something like, if you spend your whole life punishing yourself, my grandma will come haunt you. She liked you too much for that. She's crying as she says it, half laughing. He reaches out, slowly, giving her every chance to pull back. She doesn't. They hold on to each other like two people who have finally accepted that pain is not a reason to stay apart. The kiss itself is soft, tear-salted, not that choreographed spin and dip style. It feels like two people leaning forward out of habit, not performance. And honestly, considering everything they've gone through, anything more dramatic would have felt fake. Their affection throughout the show is built on 1,000 little acts of staying to listen when it's uncomfortable, staying through another person's shame, staying in the room while they rage about something you did. One kiss isn't going to erase environmental crimes, but as a symbol of them choosing each other in a complicated world, it works. Now, I know some of you are probably watching all this and wondering, okay, but does the show go all the way with its themes? Or does it chicken out at the very end and wrap everything up in a neat little bow? The answer is, sort of in between. It doesn't go grimdark, everyone pays and nothing gets better, but it also doesn't hand Lin Feng a clean slate and a happily ever after with zero residue. Yes, they win portions of the lawsuit, but not everything. Some claims get thrown out on technicalities. Some residents accept settlements that are lower than what they deserve because they're tired and old and just want peace. The company, under Lin Feng's push, sets up a long-term fund for cleanup and medical aid. But the narrative is very clear. Money is not a miracle. A shot of kids playing near a still-damaged river at the end makes that clear. Real harm leaves scars. Career-wise, he doesn't stay the unchallenged king of the corporation either. After all the legal chaos, his father pretty much says, you've turned this place upside down. Maybe that's what was needed. But you, personally, can't be the face of stability anymore. Investors are spooked. And in an actually very mature move, Lin Feng steps down from the CEO role willingly and transitions to a different position focused on corporate responsibility and community projects. That isn't as flashy as the I rule the empire, Plus I'm morally right, ending some viewers might have wanted. But it fits the show's whole vibe of shifting what power even means for him. He doesn't need the top chair to be who he's decided to be. Excive's ending, professionally, is probably one of my favorite parts because it avoids both extremes of starving artist and overnight celebrity. Her documentary art hybrid project gains attention through the trial, yes, but it's not like she becomes some global sensation. She gets enough recognition to land stable commissions, collaborate with NGOs, maybe hold a small gallery show. More importantly, she has choices now. No more picking between paying rent and buying decent paper. You see her at the end teaching a small workshop for local kids with her grandma's photo on a shelf watching over. And there's this serenity there that we haven't seen on her face before. In terms of their relationship dynamic in the final stretch, something I really appreciate is that they don't turn Exive into his moral leash. You know that annoying trope where the female lead becomes like the conscience puppet, constantly reminding the guy, don't be bad. Remember you're good now? They sidestep that. There's a key scene where he messes up again, smaller scale, but still meaningful. He's negotiating a redevelopment project in another area with a shady landlord, and in order to secure quick housing for displaced tenants, he agrees to terms that will likely push out an older shop owner. He rationalizes it as a necessary compromise. When Exive finds out, she doesn't go full "you're evil again" mode. She says, I'm not your judge. I just need you to hear the part of you that isn't comfortable and stop burying it under contracts. That might sound like some fortune cookie line on paper, but in the scene it plays as this very adult reminder. You will make imperfect choices, but the important thing is whether you keep listening when your gut says, hey, this feels like old behavior. Their conversations have shifted from melodramatic fights to honest negotiations about values. To me, that's more romantic than 10 rooftop proposals. Now, I want to talk about one more thread before I eventually move towards the bigger verdict stuff in the final part. The mysterious older woman I mentioned earlier. Because yes, the show does circle back to her. Was she an angel? A ghost? A metaphor? They never slap a label on her, but they give you just enough to chew on. Near the last few episodes, after the main legal arc calms a bit, Feng goes back to that rural town alone. He walks by the little shrine we saw before, and there she is again, sweeping the steps like she belongs there. He's no longer freaked out by her repeated appearances. There's even a hint of wary familiarity. He leaves an offering, just a simple bundle of flowers, and says, almost to himself, if the years bent for me, like you said, I don't know if I did enough with it. She looks up, squints at him for a long moment, and then hits him with something like, regret is a slow eater. If it's still biting you, it means you're still alive enough to feed it. That's not a curse. Is that a totally cryptic line? Absolutely. Did I rewind it 3 times? Also yes. He laughs this tired little laugh and asks the question we've all been wanting him to ask. Was it you? Did you send me back? She tilts her head. This is where a lesser show would go into a flashback of her as some cosmic judge. But here, she just says, who else would give you more time but the people you owed it to? Then she walks away. You can interpret that a lot of ways. Maybe she's the embodiment of the town, or of forgotten victims. Maybe she's literally no one magical, and he's reading meaning into a random kind stranger. The show doesn't confirm anything. I kind of love that. Keeping that slightly supernatural edge unpinned lets the story stay more about human choices and less about a fantasy rulebook. It also threads nicely into the visual of Exive later going to that same shrine at the very end, leaving her own flowers, as if she's acknowledging the weirdness and the weight of everything that's happened without needing a diagram. From a craftsmanship point of view, those scenes with the older woman are shot in this very earthy, grounded way. No halo lighting, no weird filters. She's wearing plain clothes, her broom is old and frayed, the shrine is modest. The sound here is heavy on crickets, wind, distant dogs, that sort of thing. It feels like the show saying, if there are miracles, they look like this, ordinary, almost unnoticeable, happening in the margins. Alright, I've been mostly praising or at least admiring specific choices, so let me poke at some of the things that didn't quite land for me in this back half, because it's not flawless and I don't want to sound like I've joined its fan club without a membership exam. First off, the corporate realism, like I hinted, gets wobbly. There are scenes where billion-level deals are signed in what looks like a co-working space conference room with the signatures and a handshake, and I'm sitting there going, where are the 20 other lawyers? Where are the regulators? I know, drama time is short. You can't show every due diligence meeting. But sometimes the shortcuts are so blatant they pull you out. There's a particular bit where overnight, because of one news story, stock prices plummet, the board calls an emergency vote, and one speech completely changes everyone's mind. I'm sorry, no. Investors in reality have the attention span of gnats and the memory of elephants, not the other way around. The legal stuff too, while emotionally satisfying, sometimes dips into law and order, drama edition. A witness bursts into the courtroom right at the perfect moment with a piece of evidence that somehow no one else uncovered. The judge delivers these eloquent, almost poetic lines when issuing orders that made me cackle a little because most judges I've seen barely string 3 adjectives together in a ruling. If you're someone who needs your legal plots airtight and brutally accurate, you're probably going to be rolling your eyes here and there. For me, the emotional truth was strong enough that I forgave most of it. But yeah, it's not documentary level. Second, there's this small side plot with Mei Lan, ex-Ive's best friend, and a potential love interest in the latter half that felt tacked on. They bring in this journalist who's covering the lawsuit. He and Mei Lan bicker a bit, share a couple of late-night editing sessions. There's clearly something sparking, and then it kind of fizzles with a vague hint of maybe someday. On one hand, I like that not every relationship is forced to fully bloom on screen. On the other, the amount of screen time they gave him in the back half made me feel like they started writing a proper romance and then cut it in post. Some of those minutes could have been spent fleshing out other emotionally rich threads instead of him making cheesy, only print truth comments. Third, and this might be controversial, I think they slightly chickened out with Royan at the absolute end. Not in terms of legal consequences, those were decent, but in how they shaded her inner world. We get one short flashback montage of her as a kid again, alone in that shop, cleaning floors, listening to rich customers gossip. Then we snap back to her in prison uniforms, sitting on her bunk, staring blankly. And that's it. I wanted one real scene of her actually wrestling with herself, not just visually mirroring the poor child to jailed woman arc. To be fair, the show's focus is not on rehabilitating her, and maybe giving her an extended introspective scene would have pulled sympathy in a direction they didn't want. But considering how much effort they put into making everyone else's inner shifts feel layered, the end of her arc feels abrupt. Like they were afraid that if they gave her even 5 more minutes of fleshed-out emotion, viewers would turn around and go, "So we're forgiving her now?" when that wasn't the point. I get it, but it still left a slight hollow note in an otherwise well-handled downfall. Finally, the whole metaphysical, how and why did he get reborn concept, which I praised for staying mostly in the background, does occasionally feel like the writers wanted to do more but either ran out of episodes or lost their nerve. There are these scattered hints, the older woman, a few dream sequences where he hears overlapping voices from both timelines, a recurring motif of clocks stopping at certain key moments, but they never quite cohere into a clear internal rule set. For some viewers, that mysterious fog is going to be part of the charm. For others, especially people who like their fantasy logic tidy, the vagueness might feel like a cop-out. Personally, I'm fine with it staying in the maybe karma, maybe coincidence, maybe a grand cosmic glitch zone. But I do think they could have sharpened the thematic link between the magic and the message. Was the rebirth granted as a reward, a punishment, a test, a random second chance? The older woman's line about the people you owed it to suggests it's not about him being special, it's about unfinished accounts. But that idea never gets fully voiced by anyone else, which makes it feel a bit like an afterthought instead of a spine. That said, the emotional spine, which is what matters to me more, stays strong all the way up to that final shot. And I want to talk about that shot because it's one of those endings that's simple on the surface but says a lot if you sit with it. The last scene we get is not a wedding, not a baby, not a giant company ribbon cutting. It's Lin Feng and Xive at that same seaside villa where they met as kids, now renovated as a small community center, an art space jointly funded by what's left of his money and some grant. Kids are flying kites, there's paint on the walls, someone's playing off-key guitar in a corner. They're not alone, that's important. Mei Lan is there. Su Minghao is there with some scruffy found family interns, a few of the townspeople from the lawsuit arc wander in and out. It's not a private fairy tale. It's a shared one. Xive is hanging one of her new pieces on the wall, a blend of sketch and photograph of the river, now healing but still scarred. Lin Feng is helping some kid untangle a kite string. The kid complains, it's too hard, and he laughs and says, then we do it slowly. The camera lingers on that, obviously calling back that childhood line about walking slower so you remember. Then, in a mirror of the very first childhood flashback, Xive brings over 2 ice creams from a cooler, both already starting to melt in the sun. She holds one out to him, grinning, hurry up before it turns into soup. He takes it, looks at the drips, and says, it's still sweet, echoing exactly what she said as a kid without even realizing he's quoting her. She catches it, though. There's this tiny pause, this awareness passing between them that their timelines, their memories, their choices have all braided into this one ordinary, messy, beautiful present. No magical sparkles, no voiceover, just them, caramel dripping on their hands, sun too bright, wind too strong, kids yelling in the back. The very final frame is not on their faces, it's on the kite in the sky. It stutters, dips dangerously close to crashing, then catches an updraft and steadies. You could write an essay on that one shot alone about control versus letting go versus trusting the wind. Or you could just let it hit your gut and go, okay, they're going to be okay, not perfect, but okay. Which, honestly, is all I wanted for them after watching them drown for 30 episodes. I want to get more into how this drama stacks up against other second-gen series and why certain choices made it feel a bit more grown than the usual rebirth revenge formula, plus who I think this will and absolutely will not work for as an audience. And I also need to actually answer the big question. Did I, as a drama-obsessed human with way too many reincarnation plots under my belt, feel like the emotional payoff matched the build-up? So let me dig into those comparisons, expectations, and my personal reaction roller coaster before I wrap this up properly. Alright, lean in, because this one starts like a quiet punch to the ribs and then just keeps twisting. Today we are diving into Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah, a 2026 melodrama with reincarnation, revenge, and the kind of second-chance romance that makes you argue with your own reflection at 3 a.m. You're watching Story Frame Recaps. I'm so glad you're here. And if you live for character-driven chaos with pretty lighting and messier hearts, slide that subscribe in while you're here. No pressure. It just means I'll find you when the next heartbreak binge drops. Okay, let's talk about Su Lin Feng, let's talk about Lin Xive, and let's talk about how this show sold me a fantasy about rewriting fate and then asked me if I'd actually be brave enough to change anything. We open with a businessman who's already a ghost of himself. Past life Su Lin Feng is introduced in bitter grays and ice blue glass, everything about him manicured and miserable. He's the heir to a conglomerate empire, so the watch is expensive, the voice is low, and the shoulders carry entire boardrooms. But he's married to a woman who, let me be blunt, turns love into a weapon. The past life wife doesn't cackle or slap. She smiles like cut glass and stages betrayals with a silk glove. That's the tone. It's not hysterical, it's surgical. And the first episode basically euthanizes him. His downfall is clean, elegant, and heartbreaking. The show lets him crawl through betrayal with a kind of slow horror usually saved for prestige thrillers. By the time the credits roll, I had that nasty feeling in my chest, like I'd swallowed my own pride and couldn't cough it out. Then the reset. Rebirth arrives not with a neon sign, but with a heartbeat, literally, sound design going from a distant thud to a close, warm pulse as Su Lin Feng wakes up years earlier. I'm not kidding. Whoever mixed this knew exactly how to whisper, "You get another shot" in your ear. He gets his life back, and this time, he swerves. No more marrying the woman who broke him. No more playing air like a duty-bound robot. He makes a left turn straight into the orbit of Lin Xive, a girl who my cynical side wanted to call too sweet, too saintly, but the writing gives her enough spine and quiet weirdness to avoid the angel on a shelf trap. Here's the reveal I wasn't expecting to actually land emotionally. They were kids together for a slice of summer, and he forgot, but she didn't, at least not the way people forget. She remembers sensations, a lost kite, the smell of wet clay, the boy who stayed when a storm broke open the sky. It's not a full memory dump, it's a calendar of feelings. That's honestly why the romance works for me. It's not just, he picks the pure girl now. It's, he stumbles back into the ghost of a promise he made before he even knew how badly he could break. Let me talk about structure for a second, because this show is smart about it. They layer the timelines like pages of tracing paper. Past and present keep mirroring each other with tiny, nasty echoes. A scene in the present where Lin Feng signs a contract by a window with city lights bleeding into blue. Cut to the past, same angle, same window, but he's faking a smile with the wife who is already plucking the first thread on his sweater. The editing keeps using match cuts, hands, rings, paper cranes to graph those lives together. It turns choices into visible shapes. And when Su Lin Feng does something different in the second run, the camera lingers a beat longer, almost as if it's checking, "Are you sure? Is this who you're going to be now?" That visual hesitation makes him feel human. He's not a reincarnated revenge machine. He's a guy sweating through change like a boxer learning to dance. Su Lin Feng as a character works because he isn't suddenly perfect. He's richer, wiser, and yes, a lot more smug about cutting snakes off at the head. But he's also suspicious in a way that can become cruel if left unchecked. The actor playing him does something I love with his eyes. He can look tender and predatory in the same breath, and it makes every love scene a tiny negotiation. In boardrooms, he sits back like a lion that's recently eaten, letting the silence fatten the air before he speaks. Around Lin Xive, he has these micro-pauses, like he's waiting for her to flinch at the worst part of him. It's so specific and so lived in that I found myself pausing to clock when he breathes. And you know what? That's when you know an actor's cooking. When you can hear the inhale in your own chest. Now Lin Xive. I need to talk about her voice because it's our compass. She works part-time in a flower shop now, and you'll think, oh of course. But wait, the show doesn't make her a manic pixie in a greenhouse of metaphors. It shows her balancing receipts in ink-stained fingers, it gives her depths, it gives her a late bus, it gives her a temper when people interrupt. She's the kind of good that comes from deciding to be kind in a world that keeps snatching the nearest rug. When she starts recognizing strains of the past, the odd alignment of a street vendor's bell, a jar of marbles, his childhood scar, she doesn't swoon. She interrogates her own sense of déjà vu like a scientist with a heart. There's my girl. And when the chemistry starts brewing, it's not frantic, it's gravitational. Their first almost confession scene in the conservatory? The way the camera circles them past a slow-dripping fountain and caught the reflection of her face inside his watch crystal, I might have actually gasped. And I don't gasp. I snark. Let's address the past life wife because this is where the show stumbles toward brilliance. In lazy writing, she'd be a cartoon cobra. Here, she's maddeningly real. Cool, cultured, flinty. I can already hear the comments saying, I hate her, but I get her. She grew up learning to survive by precision. Her father ran scams dressed as etiquette. Love, to her, is leverage dressed as trust. The actress delivers lines like poisoned honey, and I caught at least 3 moments where the mask cracked at the edges. In the present timeline, when Lin Feng avoids her like she's a lit fuse, she starts spinning. Watching her push against fate's new architecture, You know how satisfying that is? It's like seeing someone try to run through glass they can't see. You get a perfect storm of pity and loathing, which is the sweet spot for a memorable antagonist. She becomes less evil X, and more, if you never got a second chance, how would you try to steal one? I loved that the show let her be dangerous without letting her be the only danger. The supporting cast is a garden of tiny knives. There's Lin Feng's best friend / CFO, the kind that makes gallows humor sound like therapy. He functions as the voice of reason with spreadsheets, and there's a scene where he's half-drunk at karaoke, mumbling about how second chances are just new ways to lie to yourself, and I wanted to scratch that into a notebook. Then you've got Lin Feng's father, an old-school titan who confuses love with control. Every conversation between them is strategy disguised as family, and the blocking has them in parallel lines, never intersecting, until that episode where they finally break their geometry and stand face-to-face in the rain. Yes, it's a drama cliché. No, I don't care. The way the lighting cut across the father's cheekbones like prison bars? May. Lin Xive's world is quieter, but arguably richer. Her grandmother is a retired literature teacher who folds grocery lists into paper cranes and stores them in a jar. And when Xive asks why, she says, "So I can look back at what I thought I needed and what I actually lived without." That line hooked into my ribcage. Xive's best friend runs a tiny night market stall, smuggling in levity with hot broth and honest glares. We also get a second male lead, the gentle paramedic, who was there during Xive's childhood accident. And if you're rolling your eyes at a love triangle, same, but this one isn't a plot tax. He's not an obstacle, he's a lesson. He stands as a version of love that's safe and seen, the kind that never asks you to leap across timelines. You'll root for him in individual moments. There's a bandage scene that made my chest incandescent, and you'll also understand why Xive's gravity tilts elsewhere. That bittersweet clarity is how you avoid wrecking your second lead with lazy writing. Pacing-wise, the first 4 episodes set the board with restraint. No hyperactive flashback montages, no whiplash. The show trusts that we can smell patterns. Around episodes 5 through 8, it starts threading in the business intrigue, hostile takeovers, shell companies, a leaked tender that smells like old betrayal wearing new cologne. And you see how the past keeps trying to photocopy itself. The difference is Lin Feng keeps jamming the machine. He sidesteps baits he once swallowed whole. He invests in a startup Xive cares about, not because he's buying her, but because he remembers what it felt like to have all his instincts dismissed. And this is where the show gets spicy. It asks whether his protection is actually control wearing softer clothes. Xive calls him out, gently at first, then with steel. "I don't need your umbrella. I need the weather report." Tell me that's not phenomenal writing. Let's talk dialogue, because I was ready to roll my eyes at sugar slogans. But the scriptwriter knows how to slice with clarity. The characters don't speak in aphorisms. They argue in metaphors that fit their lives. Boardroom lines land like chess moves. Street market banter actually sounds like people who count coins. My favorite exchange early on is when Lin Feng says, "If I had met you first," and Xive cuts him off, "You did." She says it with this little shrug that's somehow both forgiving and not letting him wriggle out of responsibility. The silence after is a character in itself. The show is really good at letting quips fall away into ache. Cinematography and color grading deserve their own standing ovation. The past gets framed in cool palettes with hard reflections. The present is warmer, but not syrupy. They do this clever thing with seasonal shifts too. Past life love scenes are in artificial spring, hotel peach blossoms, indoor gardens, while present-day tenderness lives in real weather. You can feel the damp of autumn on their coats, the grit of snow melting on a curb. There's a recurring visual of a red scarf threading through crowds, and the camera follows the cloth, not the faces, letting color be the memory you chase. I'm a sucker for that kind of visual motif. Even insert shots feel authored. Ink smeared on a receipt, the slow roll of a marble on linoleum floor. The director clearly has a thing for hands and doorways. People are constantly either reaching or refusing, and doors are either ajar or sealed like vaults. And yes, I ate that symbolism like candy. The score is intimate, thank heavens. No overwrought violence drilling you into submission. Piano keys like raindrops, a wooden flute that creeps in whenever childhood memories drift into frame, and this subtly hopeful theme that plays when Lin Feng rewrites a choice. I'll be honest, I cried at a scene that wouldn't have landed as hard without that tiny music swell. They find the old tree where they once hid from the storm, grown and scarred, and the composer tucks in a heartbeat of the main melody, but in a major key, like the past is finally exhaling. Sound design earns points too. The city hum is distinct by district. Corporate floors sound vacuum-sealed. Night markets breathe. Watch for the recurring sound cue of a bell on a bicycle, sometimes foreground, sometimes memory level, used like a breadcrumb trail through the episodes. Editing choices are bold in places. There's a split-screen sequence that braids a past life argument with a present-day almost kiss, and the slightest misalignment in timing makes you feel like two lives are permanently just an inch off, which is literally their problem. Smash cuts are used sparingly but land hard. A slammed door downcuts to a gavel. A spilled cup of tea smash cuts to blood spiraling down a sink in the past life. And I swear I felt it in my gums. They avoid the cheap, echoed voiceover across timelines. Thank you for that mercy. Montage is used for emotional progression more than plot catch-up, which is exactly where it belongs. Costume and set design pull more weight than you think. Lin Feng's suits shift from armor to textile memory, rigid charcoal to softer navy too. Eventually, a cardigan moment that made me pause and go, oh. He's letting himself be comfortable. The past life wife is always dressed in precise geometry. Chevron patterns, sharp collars, a ritual of control. Lin Exive avoids the obvious pastels mean purity trap. She wears earth tones, faded reds, sun-washed blues, garments that look lived in. You can judge how safe she feels by the length of her sleeves, short when she's at ease, pulled down when she's guarding herself. Their homes mirror them too. Lin Feng's penthouse starts as a glass museum, all edges and echo, and gradually accumulates softness, an ugly but loved mug, a plant that refuses to die, a photo that isn't staged. Exive's apartment is a mosaic of thrift and memory. Stacks of books with cracked spines, a crooked lamp with stubborn loyalty, a chipped ball that holds lucky coins. It's the kind of interior that makes you understand why he keeps showing up. The directing style stays patient and fiercely intentional. Scenes are blocked around invisible power lines. One of my favorite staging moves happens in a boardroom when Lin Feng deliberately takes the junior chair and watches men with generational arrogance talk themselves in circles, trying to understand why their old tricks bounce off him. In romance scenes, the director isn't afraid of space. They let shoulders angle, let knuckles hover. A breath is an event. It's old-school restraint in a binge-hour climate, and I respect it. When the camera finally rushes in for a close, you feel the permission being granted, not just taken. And holy plot twists, they did not slack. There's a reveal around episode 12 that recontextualizes a childhood scene without undercutting it. You learn why their memories don't line up cleanly. And it's not amnesia, it's guilt. That's such a smarter choice. We get answers to why Lin Feng never remembered the girl by the storm tree, even though she remembers the boy with the muddy shoes. The explanation is actually a case of mistaken identity that morphs into chosen identity. And I audibly muttered, "Okay, you got me," at my screen. The writers resist the cheap twist trap. Instead of deploying shock just to keep us awake, they line up the dominoes so that when something falls, you get that delicious awe moment, shock with aftertaste. And when the show does hit you with something sharp, a board member with a secret alliance, a betrayal that isn't from the direction you're staring, it feels like the story holding up a mirror and asking, "You thought only this person was capable of that?" Chemistry check, because you know I'm picky. Our leads crackle without short-circuiting the plot. They don't burn too fast. The show gives them the right balance of tenderness and friction. There's a scene where Exive takes Lin Feng's tie and loops it slowly while reading a grocery list out loud: bananas, soy sauce, scallions, and the intimacy is this domestic thunder. He looks at her like every aisle of his life just got reordered. Later, their first kiss doesn't come after some heroic save. It comes after an argument where she calls him arrogant and he finally admits he's scared. That's hot. Don't argue with me. Thematically, the show's biting off a lot, and most of it gets chewed properly. Fate versus choice isn't just a poster line. It plays out in contracts, in closet doors, in the way people answer their phones. The story keeps interrogating what pure even means. Lin Exive isn't good because she never lies. She's good because when she lies, she breaks into a sweat and then corrects course like she can't stand the taste. Su Lin Feng isn't heroic because he has money. He's heroic when he spends his power like it's on loan. The corporate intrigue never balloons into nonsense. It stays tethered to character, who wants to feel safe, who wants to feel seen, who confuses debt with love. And there's a sly thread about class and memory too. Rich people get to archive, poor people get to survive. The show argues that love is an archive only if you have the courage to maintain it. Music aside, the silence is weaponized beautifully. There are several sequences with just ambient noise, and the space forces you into their heads. One late-night scene in a convenience store where the only sounds are the fluorescent bus and a microwave ding? Wow! That moment says more about adult loneliness than a monologue ever could. You see two people in parallel aisles buying instant food, trying to feed something hunger-adjacent but not hunger. It's artful without shouting, "I'm art." On subtitles and localization choices, if you're watching with English subs, they leave Nona in the title's translation path, and that's actually a thoughtful move. Miss doesn't quite carry the same cultural charge here. The show is playing on the idea of being mislabeled, being the wrong girl, the wrong choice, the scapegoat. Keeping the flavor matters. Dialogue-wise, the translators do a tight job with idioms. There's a line where Exive says, "Don't tighten the jar if you're not planning to pickle," which means don't make promises you won't keep. And the English phrasing keeps the kitchen imagery. That's love. Thank you for not flattening. I want to highlight the fight choreography and physical acting because the show doesn't explode into action, but when bodies move with intent, it means something. Lin Feng's punches in the gym early on are clean and quiet, the form of a man wresting control, not flailing. Later, when he gets pulled into an actual scuffle because someone threatened Exive, it's messy, less textbook, more feral. And that shift in physicality is a choice. Exive's body language arc is a whole thesis. She starts the show small in public, shoulders slightly folded, voice kept warm and low. When she begins to feel safe, she takes up bench space in the most ordinary way. Back down, elbow out, laugh untucked. Watch her hands when she's lying. She tucks her thumbs. When she tells a truth she's scared of, she flattens her palms. The attention to detail deserves screenshots and a mood board. Let me talk briefly about the office politics subplot that quietly crushed me. There's a junior analyst who gets swept into the fraud investigation. She's eager, she's competent, and she's invisible to people in power until she isn't. The show lets her be instrumental in catching a shell company shift, and it refrains from turning her into either a saint or a casualty. She gets credit, she gets yelled at, she gets a raise that's meaningful and not magical. This is such a tiny arc in a big show, and it matters because it sells the idea that change isn't only in grand gestures. The orchestra of a corporate redemption is played by people who don't have business cards with gold foiling. Yes, I clapped. Quietly. On my couch. Alone like a gremlin. Symbolism fans, pull up. Water is everywhere, but used in specific moods. Past life's water is polished and framed, hotel pools, cut glass tumblers, while present water is unpredictable, rain on tile, gutter drips, sweat slipping down a temple. The red thread motif isn't literal string, but shows up in textile, signage, scarf, the ribbon around a package. Every time read snakes through a frame where their choices diverge, I got that weird little goosebump trail that means the visual language is whispering. Birds come in as sketched cranes from the grandmother's paper, and twice we get a live bird moment that's not cute but a little chaotic, like a pigeon crashing into the gentle afternoon. Memory isn't tidy. I love that this show lets symbols misbehave. We should get into the ethics of rebirth, because shows like this can get icky if every second chance move is just one person shaping another like Play-Doh. Here, Lin Feng's big repentance is that he stops treating his memory as a blank check. He owes people conversations, not corrections. He tells Exive about the past life mess earlier than expected. Bless that choice. And the fallout isn't melodrama. It's surgical. She asks if she's a person to him or a refuge. He answers badly at first, and then he answers well, and the journey between those two answers is the real love story. Meanwhile, the show doesn't punish the past life wife with lazy karma. It gives her a mirror and a door. Whether she walks through isn't up to him. That's growth. Directorially, there's a meta choice I found ballsy. Mid-season, the show plants a fake-out dream sequence, but you don't realize it's a constructed fantasy until 3 scenes later when a prop is in the wrong place. That tiny dislocation forces you to ask how much of what you're seeing is curated by the character's fear. It's a trick, sure, but it's the good kind, the kind that makes you rewatch with fresh curiosity. Along the way, there's a quiet bottle episode that lives in a single setting, the grandmother's apartment during a power outage. And if you're impatient, you'll call it filler. If you've ever loved someone across grief, you'll call it church. The candles, the old radio, the way shadows make all their faces look like the kids they used to be. It's filmmaking with a pulse. Is it perfect? No. There are 2 points where the pacing goes gelatinous. One mid-arc misunderstanding drags an episode longer than it needs to. And yes, a certain villain monologue in a parking garage gave me déjà gag. But the show tends to recover quickly with emotionally satisfying reversals. When a trope appears, it's usually carrying something sharper in its pocket. The accidental overnight stay isn't played for cutesy scandal. It's used to force people to talk in the kind of 3 a.m. honesty that daylight always dilutes. The public humiliation at a gala gets retooled into a microphone drop where the person you thought was the target flips the entire room using a truth everyone was too polite to say. That's the writing team flexing restraint and then releasing it like a rubber band. Let me gush about a single scene because I'm still thinking about it. There's a sequence in which Lin Feng and Exive return to a derelict community center that once held their childhood summer art classes. The floor is dust, the windows are grimy, and they find a wall with their faint pencil heights marked side by side. He's taller than her now by the same 2 finger widths he was as a kid. The shot frames their backs, not their faces, and the music is silent. He reaches up and adds a new line over both their heads, then writes today's date. She looks at it and says, "Will we measure ourselves again?" And he says, "Only if we grow." I actually had to pause and pace my living room like a distraught auntie. That's not just cute. That's an entire thesis about choosing to be alive in the present rather than embalmed in nostalgia. Comparisons, because I know some of you are going to ask which bucket to put this in. On paper, it sits with your classic rebirth revenge romances, but it refuses the neon sign revenge beats. Instead, it keeps translating vengeance into better boundaries. It borrows the aching mood of slow-burn healing dramas and spices it with enough corporate chess to keep the stakes simmering. If you like romances where the kiss isn't fireworks, but the moment your lungs finally fill with air, you're in the right neighborhood. If you need breakneck twists every 10 minutes, you might tap your foot a little. But even then, the character work will sedate your impatience. Acting across the board rarely slips. The actor playing the father has one scene where he grieves out of focus behind a window, and it's such a generous choice to keep him at a distance. The show trusts us to recognize that men like him bleed off camera. The past life wife's actress is asked to cry without smearing her makeup, and she does it in a way that feels vain and vulnerable. The best friend nails punchlines, but his eyes always clock exits like someone who has cleaned up his friend's disasters before. The paramedic second lead brings a whole storm of kindness without a hint of performative sainthood, and in his final act turn, he chooses self-respect in a way that made me whisper, "Good for you," to an empty room. Performance chemistry is a juggling act, and the director keeps these balls in the air without letting anyone steal a scene just to score points. Cultural themes pop through in ways that don't alienate an international audience. Filial duty is a rope tugged from both ends. Appearances aren't vanity, they're moral currency in certain rooms. Gossip is a political tool, not just noise. And I appreciated the specificity in food culture. Meals are where forgiveness gets attempted. There's a dish that shows up twice, a bitter herbal soup the grandmother makes when someone's sick, and it evolves from punishment to comfort. Later, Lin Feng cooks it badly, and you can practically taste the apology. I swear if smell-o-vision ever becomes real, this show will be illegal. There are small visual Easter eggs that reward you. The wristwatch that fogs when Lin Feng lies. The potted plant that thrives in Xive's window and immediately droops under a cold office lamp. A recurring alley mural that keeps getting painted over and repainted, each version changing a single detail in a way that lines up with the plot beats. The production design team is basically leaving love letters for attentive viewers. It's generous television. I've got to touch on how the show handles forgiveness because that's the slippery one. Does everyone get a redemption? No. Thank goodness. Some people just get caught. Some people keep running. But the show draws a thin, clean line between apology and amends. One character, no spoilers, delivers the most honest sorry I've heard on TV in ages. I'm not asking you to let me back in. I'm asking you not to let what I did be the last thing about me you remember. If your ribcage doesn't do that involuntary wince smile of recognition, I can't help you. From a technical point, the lighting avoids the soap glow trap. Night exteriors embrace sodium vapor orange and blue LED conflict without turning the frame into a rave. Interiors actually respect practicals, meaning lamps look like they're doing work and not pretending. When romance needs polish, they give you bounce light glows off warm walls. When pain needs exposure, they go overhead and honest. Shadow use in the office scenes reads like a map of who is telling the whole truth. Whoever ran the gaffer team deserves a soft chair and a hard drink. If I had a single wishlist week, it would be trimming to subplots that nibble around the mid-range. One competitor arc feels like a rerun of a better scene from 3 episodes prior, and an online scandal storyline dips its toe into the shallow end of social media without committing to the ugliness. The show is most alive when it keeps the stakes inside rooms where people can smell each other's fear. The digital smearing never quite reaches the level of viciousness we've all seen screenshots of at 2 a.m., and maybe that's mercy, but it also reads a hair sanitized. Anyway, file this under shows that pretend to be about second chances and are actually about the first time you choose differently on purpose. I can't stop thinking about the little kid versions of them, wet and shaking under that tree, and how adulthood sometimes feels like spending years trying to get back to the smallest true thing about you. The writing knows that, the actors know that, and the camera knows that. There's a late episode beat where Xive looks at Lin Feng sleeping on her couch, his tie loosened, his mouth slightly open, not attractive at all, and she laughs the soft, startled laugh like she just found out the ocean fits in a teacup, and in that moment, she sees the whole ridiculous miracle of it. Not the myth of fated souls, but the simple, sloppy grace of liking who he is when nobody's watching him be Su Lin Feng. The camera holds, her smile trembles, and then the moment just exists. No fireworks, no music punch, just a human heartbeat choosing to stay in a small room where someone drools a little in his sleep. That's when the show earns the romance. Not with grand gestures, with breath. From there the late season stretch raises the heat without frying the dish. The business plot doesn't blow up into cartoon villainy. It keeps skin in the game for everyone we actually care about. Our cool-headed CFO best friend finally stops being the sarcasm sprinkler and puts his neck on the line. ghosting an internal audit trail that points straight to a board member who has been laundering old grudges under new shell companies. It's not a sting operation. It's careful, painful house cleaning. Lin Feng doesn't go full warlord. He picks battles that align with who he wants to be now, which is somehow scarier for his enemies because there's nothing to predict in a man who refuses to repeat himself. You can feel the show asking you if maturity is just another word for strategy, or if it's courage with a better haircut. I bought it. I bought all of it. One of the boldest choices they made pays off right here. Because Lin Feng laid his reincarnation cards on the table earlier in the run, the final doesn't waste time on a last-minute truth bomb implosion. There's no, you lied to me for 20 episodes, meltdown. Instead, we watch two adults disagree, recalibrate, and then fight the same dragon side by side. It's strangely exhilarating to get a third-act couple who keep talking even when it's hard. When Exive looks him in the eye and says, "Your fear isn't a reason. It's a weather report," he finally laughs, not unkindly, but like a man recognized. The fear doesn't magically vanish. The choices just happen anyway. That's growth. Messy, sweaty, shoulder-aching growth. The past life wife gets her last dance, and I need to give the show credit for refusing to make her a peanutta. Her endgame is subtle. No screaming in a parking lot, no his tricks with mascara rivers. She thinks she's setting a trap that will make Lin Feng look like he's suffocating the woman he claims to love, an old trick she's used because it always used to work. The trap simply doesn't hold because the people she's trying to manipulate don't play that game anymore. And that defeat hits different. She isn't destroyed by him. She's starved of an audience for her favorite magic trick, and silence is brutal. The writers give her a solitary scene on a balcony with a glass she never drinks. The wind lifts a strand of hair, she watches the city, and for the first time she looks small in her own frame. Not absolved, not damaged, just a person who has run out of versions of herself that still function. I'm telling you that quiet is louder than any slap. Second lead stands, I felt you watching with me, and the show heard you too. The paramedic's exit is a thing of grace. There's no martyr act, no poisonous parting shot. He asks Exive, not for an if only, but for a memory he can keep that belongs only to them. She gives him one, not romantic, not cheap, a shared ritual in the night market with broth that steam signs their faces. He moves cities, not to disappear in shame, but to choose a life that isn't measured in almosts. And in a small, kind scene much later, Lin Feng thanks him, not for stepping aside like this is a victory parade, but for being present during a chapter of her life that taught her how to feel safe. I actually whispered, "Good." Yes, to my screen like a lunatic neighbor. The father arc threads a needle I didn't think they could without stabbing me. We never get the big weepy repentant speech. Thank goodness. These men are forged in a kiln of saving face and equating control with protection. They do not suddenly become poets. What we get is two gestures. First, a small financial decision that hurts him more than he shows, transferring a slice of authority without a power play clause attached. Second, a physical move in the rain where he steps behind Lin Feng, not in front. It's maybe 2 seconds long. If you blink, you might miss it. I rewound. Twice. That's what love looks like for him. Changing formation in a storm. Later, there's an unsigned letter tucked into an old ledger that explains nothing and apologizes for everything through the numbers he chose to write instead of the words he couldn't. Knife. Twisted. Thanks. As for Grandma, they resist the urge to make her a plot device. She does have a health scare because the Jonah gods demand at least one emergency room scene. But the aftermath is a love letter, not a grief tour. She sits at the table with a teacup in her palm and tells Lin Feng, "When you were boys, you chased thunderstorms." Chasing is a baby word for choosing. He laughs because he knows he never knew her when he was a boy, and then he stops laughing because in a weird way, he did. Her paper crane's jar is full by the final stretch, and I braced for a symbolic topple, but they don't smash it. They empty it. Carefully, onto the table and read old grocery lists like fortune slips. You suddenly realize the show has been teaching you how to read ordinary life as prophecy. The climax never goes full pyrotechnics. The war is won with documents, doorstops, and people who refuse to flinch. There's a boardroom showdown where the camera lingers on wrists and pens and cuticles going white, and the sound drops out just a hair under normal, that dampened pressure tone you hear underwater. A time-stamped email kills an empire of lies with one clean cut. The editing cross-sews the faces you want to see during the fall. The junior analyst catching her own reflection in the black of a monitor, the CFO closing his eyes like he finally let go of an anvil, Exive not watching the news but watering a plant, refusing to make catastrophe her entertainment. That choice? That's the show's ethos wrapped in a single parallel cut. Live your life. Let truth do its job. And then they take all that adrenaline and do something disarmingly gentle with it. No tuxedos, no bridal march. We end not at a wedding hall, but in stubborn daylight. They revisit the storm tree, which is no longer picturesque, by the way. It's gnarled, bandaged by city maintenance, scarred like an old knee. The camera does not beautify it. The score barely kisses the air. Lin Feng puts his palm against the bark like he's clocking a pulse and says, "I remember now, but I don't want the memory to be the point." Exive answers, "The point is that we both showed up." They hang a tiny red ribbon, not as destiny rope, but as a bookmark. Is it corny? Maybe on paper. On screen, with the way they play it, it's two people choosing a present over a museum. And then they leave. They don't linger. They go to buy soy sauce. I could not have loved that more if I tried. Visually, the show's last hour relaxes its shoulders. The color language finally lets warmth be honest instead of aspirational. We get umber that isn't syrup, blue that isn't ice, skin tones that look like skin. Costume-wise, Lin Feng wears softness like he's testing knitwear for the first time and realizing it doesn't itch. Exive rocks a coat that's practical as a sermon. Their outfits match not by palette but by purpose. Both have deep pockets and somewhere to put their hands when conversation turns into contentment. The DP lets sunlight misbehave through window blinds, and it paints stripes on the floor like sheet music. Tell me that isn't deliberate. Now, the last song. I've been waiting to talk about this. The composer reprises the childhood motif one final time, but not as a tearjerker. The melody turns playful, almost clumsy, like a beginner learning scales with joy. The percussion is domestic, wooden spoons, tin lids, literal kitchen tools sampled into rhythm. End credits roll over sounds you recognize from earlier episodes, stitched into something like a home demo. It's cheeky and sentimental in the best way. If you hang through the scroll, there's a blink-and-miss button scene where grandma teaches a neighborhood kid to fold a crane while grousing about the price of onions. It's not a Marvel tag, it's a benediction. Rewatch value is high, and I don't say that lightly. On a second pass, you'll catch microclues that the show sprinkled with a miser's hand. The watch face I mentioned earlier doesn't only fog when the man lies, it fogs when he lies to himself, which will make you yellow come on at your TV around episode 3 when you realize the tell started before you spotted it. The bicycle bell breadcrumb shows up in reflections, not just sound cues. There's a storefront window in a rainstorm where the light rings mimic that bell, and the editor holds a single frame longer as if daring you to notice. Doors you thought were just props are actually signals. Hinges on the left in scenes where choice is possible. Hinges on the right when the social script is choking someone. I can hear you rolling your eyes, but go look. It's there. Acting fireworks land again and again without ever feeling like audition tapes. The leads keep outacting the camera in the best possible way. You can sense that if the editor had held 2 seconds more in half their moments, we'd have watched totally different emotions win. There's a tiny bit where Lin Feng's mouth takes a fraction of a second too long to form the word sorry, and your gut fills that extra beat with the years he didn't know how. Exive produces one tear in a phone booth that doesn't fall. It clings to the lower lash in defiance, and she never blinks it off. It's the anti-glam cry. The past life wife has a hand twitch during a handshake that sells 20 years of conditioning in one muscle spasm. The father's out-of-focus grief I mentioned earlier gets mirrored in a later moment where he's in focus but chooses to be still, and somehow the stillness hurts more. Television is a game of inches, and these people are athletes. The writer's room deserves applause for boundary work. We get an actual conversation about consent in a kitchen, mid-laugh, where they pause, name a line, and agree on the heat dial like adults. There's no pious after-school vibe to it. It's just good manners turning into good intimacy. Therapy gets a cameo through a colleague, and it isn't played as punchline or magic cure. It looks like a person wearing the same pants to 3 sessions in a row because that's their comfort uniform, and it looks like incremental courage. The show also has the decency to say the words financial abuse out loud when referring to what the past life wife engineered. That matters. Words make things real. Real things can be addressed. Not everything lands perfectly, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. A late-season product placement scene in a home goods store tries too hard to be cute about an air fryer and turns into a minute-long hostage situation. There's also one social media subplot that skims the surface of cancel culture, threatens to say something spicy, and then backs off like a cat who touched a cold cucumber. I wanted one more bite. And a tertiary antagonist vanishes with a transferred overseas line that screams scheduling conflict. Mild grumble. But you'll be over it before the next scene ends because the core story doesn't wobble. If you're wondering about age gates or content flags before you drag your mom or your teenage cousin into a binge, here's the vibe check. Emotional manipulation in the past timeline is cold and precise rather than graphic. Physical violence is rare and quick. The romance is adult without being sweaty for sport. Corporate stakes are stressful if you've ever worked under a boss who thinks decency is a luxury, but the show keeps panic at bay with competence and actual humor. Grief is present, but no funerals are used as clickbait spectacle. If you made it through slow-burn dramas that reward attention spans, you're fine here. Weirdly specific craft shout-out before I land this plane. Props. The ugly mug that shows up in Lin Feng's penthouse, tan, squat, with an unfortunate brown ring, becomes a totem. Watch who uses it. Watch where it sits in the frame when he feels at home versus when he's performing. Whoever raided the thrift store for that thing, I salute you. Hair and makeup also play fair. You can see roots, you can clock humidity, you can tell when someone slept on a sofa. Bless realism. And location scouting found corners of the city that feel both lived in and slightly mythic without screaming look at our tourism bureau money. Alleys with stubborn weeds. Rooftops with cheap chairs. A park bench that looks like it would leave a splinter if you're not careful. Heaven. So where does Tak Lagi Jadi Nona Yang Salah sit in the 2026 pile? High. Very high. It's confident without swagger, sentimental without drowning you in syrup, and patient in a way that feels like the writers trusted us to pick up what they were putting down. It scratches the reincarnation itch but declines the easy revenge sugar rush, and somehow makes choosing kindness feel like a plot twist. The romance is both a refuge and a forge. The family stuff stings. The office politics don't bore. The images linger. The music hums in your kitchen the next morning. For a show that could have coasted on trope engines, it asks better questions and offers braver answers. My personal verdict? I'm calling this one a keeper. 9.2 out of 10 paper cranes from a jar you didn't know you were filling. And yes, I'm being picky about the decimal because the scenes try to sell me an air fryer and a Twitter discourse that didn't exist. Everything else? I ate it up. If you're the kind of viewer who watches with your whole chest, who pauses to rewind a hand grace, who texts a friend at midnight to argue about whether a cardigan counts as character development, this is your next week sorted. If you need chases and explosions, maybe save it for a Sunday when your heart is tired of sprinting and just wants to jog with company. If you hung out with me this long, thank you. You don't even know how much I love doing this with you, having these ridiculous, honest conversations about fictional people who keep telling the truth about us. If you want more deep dive recaps that treat TV like the art and the mess that it is, You know where to find me. Hit subscribe to Story Frame Recaps so I can slide onto your home screen the next time a show makes me argue with my own thermostat. Drop a like if this helped you sort your watch list, share it with the friend who always says just one more episode and then lies, and tap that little bell so you don't miss when we cry, laugh, and yell together again. I'm leaving you with this. Measure yourself when you grow, not just when you're scared. I'll see you in the next frame.